Moscow, winter of 1952. The air is heavy, white, and icy, as if the cold were holding the entire city's breath. Inside the Kremlin, thick walls return a metallic echo that mingles with the steady tapping of a hammer. A group of Ministry of Security technicians is inspecting a room in the building's east wing. They have spent weeks restoring offices, adjusting cables, checking ducts, looking for cracks that might be leaks or damp spots. Routine work, or so they think. A carpenter's hammer strikes the frame of a freshly painted wall. A hollow sound makes him stop. He strikes again, slower. Something sounds different, as if a hidden cavity were answering from within. The foreman approaches, curious, and runs his hand over the surface. He feels a slight irregularity. "There is something here," he murmurs. The others watch as he takes a chisel and carefully removes a thin layer of plaster. Dust slides over the red and gold paint. Then, a silver spark peeks through the crack. The carpenter steps back. Another man, an engineer in a gray coat, leans in and pulls from the wall an object the size of a chicken egg. He holds it with his fingertips as if he might break it. The piece gleams under the light, a polished metal capsule with no wires, no screws, no visible batteries. It bears no markings, no serial number, no inscription. It is perfectly smooth, silent, inexplicable. The engineer brings it to his ear, as if he expected to hear something. There is no sound. He turns it under the lamp, noticing a small opening at the center, a circular cavity that looks like a diaphragm. None of those present can understand what it is or why it is there. It does not seem to be an electrical part, nor a component of the heating system. One of the technicians, younger, asks if it could be an explosive trap. No one dares to answer. They call an KGB officer. The man arrives with a firm step, takes the capsule, and places it on a cloth. His gaze lingers for a few seconds, cold and distrustful. "This is not ours," he says. The sentence is enough to freeze the room. In the Kremlin, for something not to be theirs means it might belong to someone else. And in 1952, that someone else can have only one address: Washington. In the days that follow, the object will be examined in military laboratories, in closed rooms where scientists speak in low voices and officers leave no notes. But that night, none of the men in the Kremlin room truly understands what has happened. The only certainty is that in the heart of Soviet power, in a building protected by walls of granite and loyalty, a foreign voice has appeared. For 7 years, the Soviets spoke of vigilance, discipline, and control. All that time, an American voice listened to them from inside the Kremlin. The war had ended, but the silence that followed was more tense than any battle. In the second half of the 1940s, when Europe's ruins still smoked, the two new victorious powers began a different struggle. It was no longer about conquering territories, but about divining thoughts. Information became the new battlefield, and to listen was the most dangerous verb of the age. In Washington, engineers of the newly created CIA experimented with microphones the size of a coin, pocket transmitters, antennas disguised in watches and fountain pens. It was the golden age of miniaturization. American laboratories produced devices as ingenious as they were fragile, small electrical miracles that could be hidden in a lamp or behind a portrait. Each month brought a novelty, an advance bolder than the last. Intelligence directors called it progress, the Soviets, arrogance. In Moscow, reports about those inventions reached the Security Committee with a mocking tone. In the Kremlin's rooms, officers nicknamed them igrushki shpionov, spy toys. To them, the Americans were children playing with wires and circuits, trusting their security to electronics, failing to understand that real power still lay in discipline and fear. "The Americans play with their machines," said a colonel of the KGB. "We play with men." Meanwhile, technology multiplied on both sides of the curtain. In Berlin, Vienna, Stockholm, and Prague, the secret war grew more sophisticated by the day. The Americans installed microphones in hotels, taxis, and cafes. The Soviets intercepted telephone cables, opened diplomatic suitcases, and recruited secretaries. Every word, every whisper had value. The difference lay in how it was obtained. In the West, science was the tool. In the Soviet Union, fear was the method. The Americans believed innovation would defeat suspicion, that manufacturing better machines would be enough to dominate the game. The Kremlin, by contrast, trusted in something older: human surveillance, obedience, and terror. Where American engineers saw schematics, the Soviets saw weaknesses. But there was one point on which both sides agreed: silence was the final frontier. To hear without being heard, to speak without leaving a trace. Each new device, each microphone, each invented frequency was a way to get a little closer to the enemy without officially crossing his lines. It was a war without gunfire, but with the same risks. The Americans played with circuits, the Soviets with fear. And in that difference of faith, each believed it had the advantage. Neither imagined that soon a simple wood carving would reveal which of the two was wrong. Washington, summer of 1945. The war in Europe has ended, and flags still wave over avenues crowded with soldiers returning home. Amid the jubilation, a new diplomatic relationship is trying to take shape among the former allies. The Soviet Union, victorious at unimaginable cost, seeks to consolidate its image of power and fraternity before the West, and nothing seems more innocent than a gesture of courtesy. In August of that year, the United States Embassy in Moscow receives an unusual invitation. The Soviet Young Pioneers Committee, a children's organization sponsored by the party, wishes to present a gift to the American people. The occasion, the organizers explain, is to celebrate the common victory over fascism and strengthen the friendship between our peoples. The gift: a wooden carving of the Great Seal of the United States, the American national emblem. Ambassador W. Avril Harriman, a veteran of wartime diplomacy, accepts the present with a smile. The ceremony is brief. A group of children dressed in red uniforms presents the carved shield, holds it before the cameras, and sings a song in honor of peace. Harriman, moved, thanks them for the gesture and declares that the symbol, a work of the Soviet people, will hang in the main office of the embassy. Photographers immortalize the moment: diplomacy, music, smiles. None of them imagines that between polished wood and varnish, an invisible enemy sleeps. The Great Seal, more than 1 meter in diameter, is installed shortly afterward on the wall of the ambassador's office, just behind his desk. Soviet carpenters help with the placement and seal the base with discreet nails. Everything seems normal. The American staff observe it with pride, an impressive piece of craftsmanship, a testament to goodwill between nations. Visitors admire it. Diplomats point to it as an example of cooperation. For years, no one thinks about that gift again. The war cools, alliances change, distrust settles in. But the shield remains there, silent, witness to every private conversation, to every classified meeting, to every word spoken in what the Americans believed to be the safest space of their foreign territory. No one could know it yet, but that act of courtesy would become the brightest deception in the history of modern espionage. A simple wood carving delivered with a smile and a song had opened an invisible window into the very heart of American diplomacy. In 1945, the Great Seal symbolized friendship. Years later, it would symbolize naivety. Lev Sergeyevich Terman, whom the world would know as Leon Theremin, was one of those inventors who seemed to live in a time different from everyone else's. In the 1920s, he created a musical instrument with neither strings nor physical contact, the theremin, a box that produced ethereal sounds through the movement of hands in the air. His invention traveled through the theaters of Europe and America, a symbol of technology's promise of the future. But when the future became suspect, so did he. In 1938, upon returning to the Soviet Union, he was arrested and disappeared into the Gulag labor camp system. There, among engineers and political prisoners, his talent became a weapon of the state. In 1946, Theremin was partially released and put to work in a secret NKVD laboratory, the precursor to the KGB. The goal: to develop new tools for the war of intelligence. The musician who had once made radio waves sing now had to make them listen. The idea he conceived seemed impossible: a passive listening device with no wires, no power source, no moving parts that might betray its presence. He simply called it the Thing. Its operation defied the logic of the time. The device consisted of a small metal cavity with a resonant antenna and a thin silver diaphragm. By itself, it emitted nothing. But when a beam of radio from an external source was aimed at it from a hidden point on the street, the diaphragm's vibration modulated the reflected signal, reproducing the sound waves in the environment: voices, footsteps, conversations. In essence, it was a sleeping ear that awakened only when someone called it. Theremin described it with a calm that was almost poetic. It is an ear that only listens when its name is whispered. The NKVD agents understood its potential at once. For the first time in history, a microphone could remain active without emitting any signal. There was no power to trace, no cables to cut, only a metal surface that, to anyone's eyes, looked like a simple inert object. Then, someone remembered the gift hanging in the office of the American ambassador, the carving of the Great Seal. Solid, decorative, hung in the center of the main wall. No one had touched it in months, no one had inspected it. Inside it, the thing could live forever, invisible, undetectable. A few days later, in a meticulous and silent operation, Theremin's device was embedded in the rear cavity of the shield. Soviet technicians sealed the wood, sanded the edges, and applied fresh varnish. The seal was reinstalled without anyone in the embassy noticing the change. From then on, every time a truck with a transmitter passed through the nearby streets, the interior of the office found its voice. Conversations, sighs, the rustle of papers were captured by Theremin's small capsule and returned to the receiver with astonishing clarity. For 7 years, the very heart of the American ambassador's office was a microphone, and every word uttered beneath that shield was heard by ears that were not in the room. For 7 years, the office of the United States ambassador in Moscow was a perfect resonant chamber. Words traveled through the air, bounced off the carved wood of the Great Seal, and were returned, imperceptibly, to a hidden receiver in some nearby KGB building. None of those present in those meetings imagined that, among the fibers of the wall, there was a foreign ear. Diplomatic decisions, intelligence reports, the most reserved discussions filtered through the most guarded room in the country. Between 1945 and 1952, the CIA lived in ignorance of its own vulnerability. The ambassador spoke with his advisors about occupation plans in Europe, treaties with Japan, the reconstruction of Germany, and every word was recorded, analyzed, and archived in Moscow. Soviet agents knew details that could only have come from inside the embassy, but the Americans could find no explanation. Inspections were meticulous, cables were checked, rugs lifted, lamps dismantled, nothing. Counterintelligence experts could not understand how conversations could escape a building protected by layers of insulation and armed guards. There were no signs of transmission, no interference, no electrical noise. Frequency detectors recorded nothing anomalous. What they did not know was that the microphone slept most of the time, inert, invisible, and woke only when a Soviet antenna from outside sent it its radio call. In Moscow, the Secret Service engineers celebrated in silence. The thing, Lev Theremin's invention, exceeded all their expectations. They perfected their receivers, expanded the listening network, learned to direct radio beams from several points in the city. When an American patrol detected a signal, the frequency changed, the microphone switched off, and the wall became only wood again. It was a chess game the Americans never knew they were playing. In one of the control meetings, a Soviet officer commented with irony, "The Americans trust their machines." Beside him, a technician replied, barely smiling, "We have Theremin." In Washington, reports of leaks piled up. Analysts suspected spies among the staff, breaches in communication channels, errors in encryption. No one thought the problem was literally behind the ambassador. Audits multiplied, transmitters were replaced, microphone detectors were installed in every room, but the shield remained there, untouchable, a symbol of prestige and friendship. Untouchable because no one would think to dismantle a state gift. Meanwhile, the KGB, the heir to the old NKVD, consolidated one of the most sophisticated surveillance networks in the world. Cities filled with listening equipment, foreign embassies were watched day and night. In the heart of the nascent Cold War, information was worth more than gold, and listening was the most powerful act of all. The Second World War had ended in Europe, but in Moscow, another had just begun. a war of silence, of waves, and of voices caught in the air, an invisible war. In the corridors of the MGB, the precursor of the KGB, news of the success arrived wrapped in discretion. Technical reports spoke of exceptional results and unprecedented operational clarity. In closed offices, counterintelligence officers celebrated without champagne or speeches, only with measured smiles and an air of contained satisfaction. They had achieved what for years had seemed impossible, to listen to the enemy in the place he believed most protected. Theramin's device, christened simply Zlatust, the golden voice, became a legend within the MGB's restricted circle. Engineers described it as a work of art and a revenge. No Western microphone had reached such purity or discretion. It needed no power, emitted no signal, left no traces. It worked only when Soviet intelligence wished, obedient to the call of an invisible frequency. In a basement of headquarters, technicians played back the recordings obtained from the office of the American ambassador. The voices arrived clear, almost intimate. Conversations mingled with the sound of cups, the rustle of papers, the snap of a lighter. In murmurs, analysts transcribed every word, classifying names, dates, and figures. From those recordings emerged reports that went directly to the Kremlin. For the senior officers, the thing was more than a tool. It was a demonstration of supremacy. In planning meetings, they spoke of the device with barely disguised pride. One of them, Colonel Trusov, a veteran of counterintelligence, lifted the small metal prototype before his subordinates and said in a grave voice, "Their seal speaks, and it tells us everything we need." The phrase was etched like an unofficial toast among the department's members. They believed the Americans would never understand how their own national symbol had been infiltrated, how an innocent gift had outwitted their vigilance and turned their office into a confessional. For Trusov and his men, this was not just an espionage operation. It was a lesson in humility the United States would never forget. The Kremlin regarded it as a silent triumph, a masterpiece of Soviet intelligence, proving that loyalty and patience could defeat Western technology. While the Americans boasted of machines, the Soviets had placed an ear inside the enemy's heart and had done so without anyone noticing. In internal reports, the thing's success was presented as a scientific contribution to the strengthening of socialist security. In private conversations, officers described it with another word: revenge. The open war had been fought in Europe, but the secret victory was happening now in the half-light of Soviet offices, where every sound of the enemy became information and every American word was a Russian victory. For the Kremlin, the most sacred symbol of the United States had literally become its own spy. And that, they thought, was historical justice. Spring of 1952. In the United States Embassy in Moscow, the days passed with the tense monotony that accompanies every diplomatic mission in enemy territory. Outside, traffic slid over the city's cobblestone streets. Inside, officials moved among papers, telephones, and typewriters. Routine was espionage's best ally, and for that reason, the discovery did not begin with a scandal, but with a routine check. An American technician from the communications service was conducting a scheduled inspection of the radio frequency system. His job was to look for unauthorized emissions, parasitic signals that could interfere with the embassy's encrypted transmissions. It was a standard procedure, almost mechanical. For weeks, he had detected nothing. But that morning, as he adjusted his portable equipment in the ambassador's office, an unexpected reading appeared on the screen. A weak, steady signal located in a range that corresponded to none of the official frequencies. The technician frowned and scanned again. Nothing. The signal had disappeared. He changed the antenna's angle and the noise returned, this time clearer. It was intermittent, as if responding to something invisible. He adjusted the controls precisely. The signal existed only when an external transmitter, perhaps a radio source in the vicinity, emitted at a very specific frequency. Without that activation, the air was clean. Intrigued, he alerted his superiors. Within hours, a small counterintelligence team gathered in the office. They closed doors, lowered blinds, and repeated the test. The signal reappeared, identical, perfectly stable. They followed the trail, slowly moving the detectors around the room. The desk, the curtains, the lamps, nothing. Until the detection beam passed in front of the carved Great Seal hanging on the wall just behind the ambassador's chair. The meter spiked. The men looked at one another in silence. One of them, an electrical engineer, carefully removed the shield from its mount. They examined it for minutes without finding anything suspicious. It was solid wood, hand-carved with no traces of wiring, but the detector did not lie. The signal was inside. With gloves and tools, they began to dismantle the back. Among shavings and dust, a small circular cavity appeared, sealed by a thin copper sheet. When they removed the sheet, the surprise was total. In the center of the cavity, nestled like an organ inside a body, was an object the size of a walnut. It shone under the light with a polished metallic tone. It had no batteries, no connectors, no visible components. It was a device that should not work and yet did. The embassy's engineers examined it for hours. They opened it, weighed it, measured it. The conclusion was unanimous. It resembled nothing known. A device that transmitted without its own power, that responded only to an external frequency, and that, somehow, had remained active for years without being detected. In the report sent to Washington, they described it with a mixture of astonishment and shame. CIA analysts gave it an immediate name: the Great Seal Bug. The Great Seal Bug. That night, the shield was placed on a table in the conference room, illuminated by a lamp. No one spoke. The men looked at the carving with the expression of those who contemplate a traitor. What had been a symbol of national pride had become the tangible proof of a silent defeat. For 7 years, the Soviets had listened to every word, every confidence, every secret uttered beneath that emblem. And they had done it without leaving a trace, with a device that made no sense, that should not have existed. The Americans, who considered themselves masters of technology, had just discovered that in the usual espionage game, the strongest wall is not made of stone. It is made of naivety. In Langley, the discovery fell like a stone into a silent pond. The first reports from Moscow were received with incredulity. A device with no power source, capable of transmitting sound only when sent a signal, defied all known technical logic. CIA and State Department analysts gathered in a windowless room. On the table, wrapped in an anti-static cloth, lay the object the Soviets had left hidden for years in the American ambassador's wall. The engineers began with the basics, to take it apart. Under microscopes and cold lights, they examined every curve, every weld, every millimeter of metal. There were no wires, no resistors, no capacitors. Only a hollow chamber and a thin metallic membrane that seemed to float inside a resonant cylinder. The first theories were contradictory. Some believed it a joke, others that it was a symbolic artifact with no real function. But the technicians who had detected the signal insisted the device transmitted real sound with clarity and fidelity. For weeks, American laboratories worked in secret. They tried to activate it without success. It emitted nothing. It responded to neither current nor electrical stimuli. Until one engineer, experimenting with a high-frequency transmitter, discovered something unexpected. When a beam of radio was aimed at the capsule, it began to vibrate as if waking from sleep. Suddenly, the wireless microphone returned a voice. Someone in the room had spoken a word in a low voice, and the sound was reproduced with clarity in the receiver. The discovery left them breathless. The mechanism was as elegant as it was unsettling. The device worked by reflecting the radio waves it received from outside. When the signal struck the small diaphragm, it oscillated to the rhythm of the air's vibrations, the words, the noises, the rustle of a paper, modulating the return frequency. The result was a perfect acoustic transmission without the need for power or any circuit at all. In simple terms, it was a microphone that did not live by itself, but woke when called. It slept for months, even years, until a nearby Soviet antenna sent it its radio impulse. Then, the capsule came to life and listened to everything around it, returning the signal without emitting anything that might betray it. A CIA engineer, after observing its operation for hours, summed up the finding with a mixture of admiration and shame. It is not a transmitter. It is a perfect acoustic trap. In their reports, analysts described it as a device 20 years ahead of its time. Nothing in the American technological arsenal came close. The precision of the design, the absence of power, the simplicity of its construction made it almost impossible to trace. This was not just a technical feat, it was a lesson. The Americans had believed they dominated electronics, but the Soviets had mastered silence. For 7 years, a small metal egg had outwitted the detectors, the inspections, and the technological arrogance of a superpower. And now, in the CIA's laboratories, that same object stared back at them, mute, gleaming, as if it still listened. For 2 years, the discovery of the Great Seal remained locked in the CIA's most secret archives. No one outside a small circle of officers and scientists knew of its existence. The Americans immediately understood the political value of the discovery. That tiny artifact was not only a piece of espionage, it was a symbol of humiliation. And like every symbol, it had to be used at the opportune moment. While analysts studied its mechanism, the original seal, carefully sealed in an airtight container, was transferred to Washington. There, in a closed room in Langley, it rested like an uncomfortable relic, proof that the Soviets had been inside the heart of United States diplomacy without anyone noticing. The American government decided to wait. To show it to the world too soon would mean admitting its own vulnerability. Better to keep it as a hidden card, a blow prepared for the theater of propaganda. That opportunity came in 1960. Tension between the superpowers had reached a critical point. That year, a U-2 spy plane had been shot down over Soviet territory and its pilot, Francis Gary Powers, captured. Moscow publicly denounced Washington's imperialist aggression before the General Assembly of the United Nations. Soviet diplomats presented themselves as victims, while the United States tried to control the damage. On the 26th of May in New York, Ambassador Henry Cabot Lodge Jr. stepped to the rostrum before a packed auditorium. In front of him, representatives from all over the world awaited the American response to the U-2 scandal. Lodge, a meticulous and theatrical politician, carried with him a black case. He spoke for a few minutes about the reality of secret war, about the mutual espionage that dominated the modern world. Then, without warning, he opened the case and took out the object history had forgotten. It was the Great Seal of the United States, the very one that 7 years earlier had hung behind the ambassador's desk in Moscow. Lodge held it up before the cameras, turning it slowly so everyone could see. Inside it, he explained, the Soviets had hidden a listening device so advanced it had gone undetected for years. This, he said, tapping the wood lightly with his knuckles, is an example of Soviet espionage in its purest form. The auditorium erupted in murmurs. Journalists surged toward the platform as photographers fired their cameras. The Soviet delegates looked at one another, astonished, with no immediate answer. Lodge, with the composure of one who has waited a long time, continued. For 7 years, this gift hung in the office of the American ambassador, and for 7 years it transmitted every word to its creators. Within hours, the images circled the E. Globe. Headlines multiplied. The talking seal. Washington reveals the Kremlin's microphone. The American symbol that spoke Russian. The great scandal of the talking seal. For public opinion, the case was a masterstroke of propaganda. Washington regained the initiative, turning its former shame into a global accusation. Moscow protested, but the evidence was indisputable. The symbol of the United States had been transformed into its own microphone. In the Kremlin's corridors, the effect was devastating. KGB officers realized that the pride of their success had turned into a weapon against them. What had been a silent triumph for some now became a public humiliation for others. The world, looking at the photographs of that carved shield, grasped the irony. In the Cold War, symbols could spy as well. And the emblem of American power had spoken more than anyone imagined. In Moscow, the news fell like a bomb. Images of the Great Seal displayed before the United Nations crossed the world with the speed of a diplomatic missile. Western newspapers called it the Kremlin's microphone, and every photograph showed the American emblem split open, the device at its center like an exposed metallic heart. For the KGB, the impact was double. shame, and fascination. On the one hand, the apparatus was a reason for technical pride. The engineers who had worked under Lev Theremin's direction knew the design was 20 years ahead of its time. No foreign agency had produced anything so elegant and so simple. In the hallways of the Institute of Acoustic Technology, scientists spoke of the invention with reverence, albeit in low voices. In purely scientific terms, the thing remained a masterpiece, but in the Kremlin's offices, the humiliation was unbearable. The operation that had been their greatest intelligence triumph had become a public spectacle. Washington had used its own success as a propagandistic weapon. The American symbol turned Soviet spy, now used to accuse them of cynicism, manipulation, and treachery. The Presidium demanded immediate answers. A review of all surveillance and counter-espionage programs was ordered. Foreign diplomatic offices in Moscow underwent exhaustive inspections. Older listening devices were replaced with more sophisticated models, with auto shut-off protocols and encrypted modulation techniques. The priority was no longer to hear the enemy, but to ensure that the enemy did not hear them. In internal meetings, senior KGB officials discussed the scope of the damage. Some feared the Americans had managed to understand the device's principle of operation. If they could reproduce it, they could use it against them. Paranoia grew like a shadow. Any experiment with passive technology without direct supervision was forbidden. Theremin's inventions, once celebrated, were filed in folders stamped with the red seal of classified, risk of exposure. One night, at a meeting of the Department of Special Engineering, a colonel named Voronin, a veteran of clandestine operations in Berlin, summed up the general sentiment with bitter irony. He held up a copy of a Western newspaper showing the image of the opened seal and said, "We laughed at their toys." He paused for a few seconds, gazing at the photograph under the office's yellowish light. "Now they're playing with ours." No one replied. The phrase hung in the air, heavy, uncomfortable, so exact that it needed no answer. In the months that followed, the KGB undertook a silent transformation. Technological espionage operations became more secret and more decentralized. The obsession with internal security grew to levels never seen before. Every government building, every foreign embassy, every communications office was inspected for microphones, cables, or interference. The watchword was simple: nothing and no one must listen to the Kremlin again. And yet, deep down, a mixture of pride and fear persisted. They had been too brilliant, too ingenious, and that had betrayed them. Theremin's creation, conceived as the supreme victory of Soviet ingenuity, had become their symbol of vulnerability. For the first time, the KGB understood what the Americans had learned from their own scandal. In the Cold War, knowledge did not belong to the one who discovered it first, but to the one who knew when to reveal it. The discovery of the talking seal transformed the very nature of espionage. What until then had been a game of men and documents became a war of frequencies, of invisible impulses and imperceptible echoes. Embassies, once temples of diplomacy, became electronic fortresses. In Moscow, in Washington, in London, and Berlin, engineers replaced translators as the new guardians of the state. Every wall became suspect, every lamp a possible ear, every shadow a threat. Diplomatic missions began to be redesigned from their foundations. The new architecture of espionage, walls were lined with metal meshes and absorbent materials. Telephone cables were shielded, windows sealed with anti-vibration films. Frequency detectors became routine tools, and technicians took a place alongside diplomats in confidential meetings. Important conversations stopped taking place in offices. They moved to gardens, to cars in motion, to walks in the rain, where sound could not be captured. The world understood that the enemy no longer needed soldiers to infiltrate. Waves, reflections, and pulses were enough. Microphones began to be hidden in the most unthinkable places. Inside electric cables, telephones, lamps, watches, and even desk ornaments. Listening devices evolved with astonishing speed, as did detection systems. The war of information had replaced the sound of weapons. Armies kept training, tanks kept parading, but the real battles were fought in silence. Every word could be a bullet, every transmission error a surrender. In the laboratories of the two superpowers, scientists and engineers worked day and night seeking ways to listen better, to speak more softly, to hide their voices even from the air that carried them. The talking seal had proved that safe places did not exist. It had shattered the illusion that borders could stop espionage. From then on, surveillance would be invisible, omnipresent, constant. No technology, however sophisticated, could completely protect a person from being heard. In the CIA's internal reports, the case was described as the beginning of a new era of technical intelligence. In the KGB's, it was simply called the era of total suspicion. Both definitions were correct. From 1960 onward, trust became a luxury and silence, a form of resistance. Espionage no longer had a face, nor a uniform, nor a flag. Only an echo that repeated itself in time, a voice that belonged to no one. The world had entered the age of invisible surveillance. Decades later, the device from the Great Seal rests in a display case at the CIA Museum in Langley. At first glance, it looks insignificant, a small metal capsule, inert, the size of a walnut. But those who look closely understand they are facing a relic of the first great technological battle of the Cold War. Not a battle of missiles or armies, but of ingenuity, patience, and silence. The invention was born from the mind of a man who was never a soldier. Lev Theremin, the musician who wanted to make the air sing. His creation, conceived halfway between science and art, ended up becoming a perfect weapon. What he had imagined as a melody of waves and vibrations was transformed by the state into a machine for listening to secrets. And, without intending to, Theremin gave shape to what would become the symbol of modern paranoia, a world in which everything could have ears. Today, the little artifact is more than a museum piece. It is a reminder of the fragility of secrecy and the audacity of human curiosity. The CIA keeps it as testimony to a time when technology could still seem magical and silence deadly. The Soviets had ridiculed the American Igrushki Shpionov, the spy toys. But in perfect irony, it was their own walls, their own pride that ended up speaking. For years, the Kremlin believed it heard everything, but a single foreign voice, trapped in wood, had been listening to them. Time erased the names of many agents, the faces of engineers, the signatures on reports. What remained was the echo, a persistent vibration as faint as a whisper through metal. In the Cold War, information had no smell, no face, no shape, only echoes, and every echo had an owner.